A bit of housekeeping. A few people are still joining us, but for those of you I've not met, my name is Anna Birley. I am the policy officer at the Co-operative Party and exploring my new career as Zoom host. As I have met lots of you before, I do these every Wednesday lunchtime and a few evenings in the week as well. It's really lovely to be joined by different faces every time. And I will do a little housekeeping before we start. I'm going to keep you all on mute just because we find that if we have people switching on and off, you get a bit of background noise and it can be harder to hear the speakers. It doesn't mean we don't want you to participate. Once we've heard from Derek and Adrian, we will be opening this up to question and answer. That is easily done. Either if you go to the bottom of your screen, you can put a virtual hand up with the participate button. It puts a little blue hands up and I can see that you want to ask a question. If you've not tried it before, you're welcome to give it a go now and experiment, and I'm not going to put you on the spot to ask something straight away. You can also use the chat function, again, at the bottom of your screen, or if you're using a different device, you might find it elsewhere, but it's a little chat pop-up. You can click and you can type a message to myself or my colleague Izzy, who's hiding behind the B symbol, for us to pick up. So you can let us know there that you'd like to ask a question, or you can type your question out. I can call on you or I can read it out for you. I try to follow up after these calls with an email. I have very success in getting around to doing this, but when people mention interesting links or articles, I can circulate those afterwards. So that's a heads up to Adrian and Derek that if you reference anything, I'm going to be asking for it after this call so I can send it on. But equally, it means that if you don't have a pen to hand and you can't scribble a link down fast enough, you're not going to miss out. And I think that's mainly it, other than the important bit of housekeeping that we record these. Lots and lots of you register. Not everyone is able to watch on a Wednesday lunchtime, and we put them on YouTube where people catch up after the event. Or if you loved it enough, you can watch it again. If you are in pajamas or less, or you just don't want to be videoed, please turn your camera off. On people on their computer or laptop, that'll be the bottom left. There's a stop video button, so you can turn that off anytime you want. You might want to turn it off while you're listening, and if you're asking a question, you can turn it back on again. So it's completely up to you. And I think other than that, I will call it a day for my bit. Some of you regulars will be thoroughly bored of hearing my voice, and you are here to hear from our expert speakers, not myself. Today we are going to Wales. We can't travel there in person, but we can travel there virtually, and we're going to learn a bit about what's been happening in Wales with respect to the response to coronavirus, and particularly in response to coronavirus in the social care sector, which is what Adrian will be able to talk to, as he is the chief exec of Cartrefi Cymru, which is a social care cooperative, but also about the role that cooperatives are playing more generally in responding to the crisis, and what role we want cooperatives to play in rebuilding our economy in a fairer way afterwards. So I think I'm going to hand over to Derek first. Derek is the chief executive of the Wales Cooperative Centre, who do some absolutely fantastic work, both working with Welsh Government to make sure that there's the policy in place for cooperatives to thrive, but also supporting the sector to grow and expand and deliver new and exciting things. So I will hand over to Derek first.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for the invite to speak to the group today. I've spoken to many Co-op Party member meetings over the years, but never in my slippers before, so this is a new experience.
It's always welcome.
Nice to see so many familiar faces. As Anna said, I'm the Chief Exec of the Wales Co-op Centre, and I'm going to speak for about 10 minutes and talk about the work of the Centre, but also of government here in Wales in response to COVID-19 to support co-ops and social enterprises during this tough time. I also wanted to take some time to talk about some of the fantastic co-ops that we've been working with in Wales and what they've been doing in response to this crisis. And then what would be really interesting for me is to open up a discussion about how we influence what comes next and to create the cooperative country that we want to create here in Wales. and what ideas we might have for making that happen. So I will mention some of my thoughts and ideas and some of the things that we've been talking about in here in Wales, but really welcome input from everyone else so we can have that discussion. For those of you that don't know, just briefly, Wales Co-op Centre is a co-op development body. I think we're probably the largest one in the UK. We do more than just co-op development. We do work around tackling social exclusion, community development, and a wide range of other activities. I think businesses might fall into two broad categories of what's happened during this crisis: those businesses that are a lot quieter, and those organisations and businesses that are a lot busier during this time. And we're certainly in the much busier category. It has been a huge amount of work being done by my colleagues to support social co-op across Wales during this time, to enable them to survive this crisis and to thrive coming out the other side. We also do a lot of work around digital inclusion and supporting people that don't have digital skills with basic digital skills. And so we're delivering iPads funded by Welsh Government to care homes so that people can have access to relatives and to have contact with, speak to their GP using a tablet computer. So it's been a busy time for us. Just before I forget, a quick plug. We'd love to see many more of you in our membership. So if you do want to join us, you can find out how to join on our website, which is wales.coop, and there's a join button in the top right-hand corner. So first of all, just to say a few words about co-ops and social enterprises during this crisis. You know, previously we were in a position, of course, that we were here to support the sector to grow. And at the moment, it's been a time of supporting the sector to survive and to get through this, whilst also thinking about what comes next. In terms of the types of issues faced by co-ops and social enterprises, they're no different from other types of businesses that we will have all read about. You know, cash flow, loss of turnover, and customers not able to open their doors. All those sorts of issues are facing our sector too. The sector in Wales, like elsewhere in the UK, you know, the biggest schemes that have been important have been the furloughing scheme, the ability to delay VAT, but there have been some discrete schemes in Wales that have been supportive of businesses in Wales, including cooperatives and social enterprises. But I think one of the first things that I would say that has been important here that doesn't happen in other parts of the UK is we have a dedicated business advice service for co-ops and social enterprises, which means that the sector can get support for those issues that matter to them and that are discrete to co-ops and social enterprises in terms of where they might get the funding or government governance issues or whatever the issue might be. And that has really shown itself to be of real value during this crisis. Our team has been able to reach out to not just existing clients on our books, but to co-ops and social enterprises across Wales who we know about, who are part of our mapping work, and support them and reach out to them and provide them with information when they've needed it. So it's been hugely important, this specialist service, because I think there's a danger that co-ops and social enterprises could get lost if that doesn't exist. And I should say we deliver that at the Wales Co-op Centre, just for full view of that. But the benefits, the business support that's been provided in Wales has been different from other parts of the UK. And other than the furloughing scheme, there has been, and the other UK-wide schemes, there have been specific schemes here. So there's been a business rate grant scheme for those paying business rates are able to benefit from business rate grants. And that's been I think, the most expensive intervention from Welsh Government in terms of its economic contribution to supporting businesses. So businesses of a certain size and a rateable value, according to the rateable value, are able to access a grant, and all businesses have been able to access a £10,000 rate a grant as long as they fall between a certain economic rateable value. So that's been a very welcome grant to support businesses to continue during this time. But there's also been an economic resilience fund which came out quite promptly, which was there to support businesses of all sizes. There's separate categories: micro businesses, SMEs, large businesses, and depending on the size of the businesses will depend on how much funding grants that those businesses have been able to access. But that fund has always been available to co-ops and social enterprises, and was very clearly stated that it was open to co-ops and social enterprises, which I don't think has always been the case in other parts of the UK. In addition to that, there has been a third sector resilience fund too, operated by the WCVA with Welsh Government funding. And for those co-ops that are community benefit cooperatives or financial mutuals, they've been able to access funding from that fund too. So there has been good support, I would say, from the Welsh Government to support the sector during this time. It is just the beginning of this, and who knows how long these funds or other funds will need to be in place to support the sector to continue to survive. But I would say, looking back on how that's been delivered, one of the reasons for ensuring that co-ops and social enterprises have been part of this support infrastructure has been that there's been strong support from Welsh Government and actually cross-party for co-ops in Wales, and that is now being demonstrated by the way that funds have been put into place to support the sector. They've also kept the sector informed, and we've been consulted on what's being put in place and when it's going to be put in place, so we can let our clients know and the wider sector know when that's available. So that information flow about what's going on and what's being thought about, and being able to communicate that to co-ops and social enterprises, has been hugely valuable, I think, because some of these funds are delivered on a first come, first served basis. So knowing about what is out there and when it becomes available is crucial, and we've been able to keep the sector involved in that. I think one of the other lessons I think that's been good for us is that co-ops, social enterprises sit within the economy department. Now, I don't think that happens across the UK. I think sometimes this sits within community or the voluntary sector department. Well, in this instance, a lot of the funding that was going out the door has come from the enterprise and business department. So being part of that government department, having links into that government department, has been extremely useful for the sector. So you know, it's by far from perfect. Obviously, we'd all want more money, but largely looking back, I think we together, collectively, Welsh Government, ourselves, other support organisations, have been able to put a fairly decent support package in place for the co-op sector. And they certainly haven't fallen between two stools, which is sometimes what's happened. In fact, sometimes the opposite can be the case, and the sector can benefit from two stools, those in place for the business sector and for the third sector. So that's where we're at, but it's a long road to keep the sector going, and we will be looking you know, to do that over the weeks and months ahead. There have been some brilliant examples of co-ops and social enterprises stepping up to support their communities, to support their workers, to support their members during this time. And I guess it shows clearly the value of the co-op model in these times when you need resilience, you need organisations to adapt, you need organisations and businesses to understand what members are wanting. And this is happening right across the UK, but we've got some fantastic examples here in Wales. Many of you will know. If you don't know them, do check out their website or look out for them online. Drive Co-operative, a new taxi cooperative here in Cardiff where I am. They only established last year, and members were agreeing to put money to one side to support a new system for booking, I think, for the taxi firm, to invest in that to make a more efficient system in future. But the members agreed, I think unanimously, to use that money to support their clients and others to get through the crisis. So providing discounts for NHS workers to get to work, supporting vulnerable people, older people, to pick up groceries, to be able to pick up prescriptions. They've been able to do that for free or in a subsidised way as a result of their values and the money they've put to one side. It's been really impressive to see how they have stepped up to support communities during this time. And I hope it will support them to continue to be a strong business going forward. We've also seen consortia developed. So in North Wales, consortia, not necessarily co-ops themselves, but coming together collaboratively, as we've seen in other parts of the UK, to create visors, to make visors for hospitals. I think in this case, Ysbyty Gwynedd in North West Wales in Bangor, to support health staff to have the right PPE equipment, and collaborating, bringing the different skills together of different organisations to make this happen at volume and at speed, recognising what is needed and what is needed now. There are loads and loads of these examples. I think it's really important that we promote these positive examples, because people can see some positive news, but also can see what these businesses do over and above what they normally do during these difficult economic times, and to influence what comes next. So another plug, we've developed quite a lot of case studies on our website under the banner of Good News Cymru, hashtag Good News Cymru. So have a look on there if you get a chance, on the Wales Co-op website, and you'll see many more examples of just this type of thing happening across Wales. Finally, I just wanted to think about what comes next and how we influence what comes next. We need to look to the future and think about the kind of society and economy that we want to create coming out of this. There will be, I am in little doubt, huge pressure from those that want to revert to business as usual and get back to how things used to be. And in order to resist that and to think about a much fairer, much more cooperative way of organising our economy and our society, we need to be ready for that. We need to be thinking about that, and we need to be making our case. One of our cooperative assembly members, sorry, not assembly members now, they're members of the Senedd, recently renamed, Jeremy Miles, is leading that work for Welsh Government, thinking about how to rebuild Wales post the COVID crisis. And we will be supporting that with ideas and thoughts about what that could look like. You know, for a start, we have something to build on in terms of the mutual aid societies that have shot up from the grassroots all across Wales and across the UK. I think there are thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of these organisations that have been set up, usually not constituted as far as I understand it, but very cooperative in spirit. The ones that I've looked at are very mutual in principle, as I say, grassroots, community structures that have been set up to serve their communities. Many of those may not want to continue going forward, but many of those might. And how can we build on that mutual aid movement to support the different future that we would like to see across the country? I'd really value some thinking about that, but it really has demonstrated how, you know, we are a cooperative in nature country. People are like that, people come together. And if we can harness that coming together to reshape how the country looks in future, we will be in a much more resilient place should a crisis like this happen again, and to prepare for what comes next. The crisis, I think, has also shown the need for local supply chains, local goods and services produced that are accessible for people when they need it. The Bevan Foundation in Wales, a think tank in Wales, produced a report today, and interestingly, one of their recommendations is to think to act more to support ownership, local ownership for businesses and organisations in the future. So not just that these supply chains operate in the areas where we need them, but also, of course, that their profits and surpluses go back to the workers, go back to the communities, and are shared much more equally in the future. So that's got to be a much bigger focus, I think, in the future. Thinking about ownership. Ownership matters. I think that's a Co-op Party campaign, or at least a Co-ops UK campaign. But ownership matters, and we need to make the case for a more distributed cooperative type of ownership for far, far more businesses. We also need to think about priorities, of course. Government economic support in Wales and across the UK has been generous and but needed, and will need to continue. But how long can this continue to go on in this way that it's going on? And you know, where will the money come from? So we need to think about priorities. We may need to start to think about much more in terms of priorities as money gets shorter. And those businesses that are environmentally friendly, that are socially just, that are economically distributing their profits, must be at the front of the queue in terms of the government support to shape the future economy. We have seen in Wales, the Welsh Government has decided very clearly not to give funding, business grant funding, to businesses that don't pay their fair share of taxes by operating from tax havens. But we need to see much more of this, so that businesses that think socially, environmentally and economically are the businesses that are prioritised in the future. And so we need to be making that case, because you know, those discussions will need to be had in the weeks and months to come. And we also need to be innovative, and Jenny might come on, Jenny Rathbone MS may come in on this later, but we need to be innovative and think differently about how we support the sector. So Jenny and colleagues at Cardiff Business School, for example, have been thinking about how equity can be provided to cooperatives in a way that doesn't mean that members and workers lose control of those businesses. You know, different types of funding like that will be needed in future, of course. Grant funding will run out, and this might be a much longer period of economic recession and trouble than we first anticipated. So it's examples and innovative ideas like that that are really going to help the co-op sector come through this and to thrive on the other side. There are many more examples that I could have talked about that others have come up with and are talking about. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to be making this case. We need to be clearly saying what the future should look like. The phrase "build back better," I think may have started in Manchester, I'm not sure, but it's certainly been used in here in Wales. we need to prepare for a different type of economy, a different type of society, very much with a much bigger role. We know co-ops are a far too small a part of the economy, and co-ops need to be a much bigger part of the future economy going forward. And we need to support that to make that happen. And one of the ways that we can do that is by influencing policy and ideas that are being generated. So to conclude, in summary, you know, I think there has been good support for co-ops and social businesses from Welsh Government, from ourselves and from others, but huge challenges lie ahead. And if we are to create this fairer, more cooperative country that we aspire to, certainly in Wales, a cooperative country in Wales is what we're all about here at the Wales Co-operative Centre, then we need to push hard and argue loudly for the type of country that we want to create based on cooperative values and principles. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Anna.
Great, thank you very much, Derek. And I will hand straight over to Adrian. I don't think you're muted, Adrian, so in theory you can just get going whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Ella. Hello, everybody. I'd like to start by telling you a few things about Cartrefi Cymru Co-operative. We were established 30 years ago as a charity specialising in support for people with learning disabilities so they could live in their own homes in the community. We only work in Wales, and we are spread across the whole country, providing services in 15 of the 22 Welsh local authority areas. We have about 1,200 staff supporting over 600 people and their families. And we are principally funded by local authorities through contracts. And we became a multi-stakeholder cooperative in 2017 in order to get better at delivering on a number of aspirations, including those of our Welsh care laws. The top aspiration is for people receiving care and support to achieve great well-being outcomes, things that matter to them and not just what a professional decides is good for them. That requires those providing a service to share power and decision-making with the people they support. It's about people having a strong voice and real control. It's about people being valued as contributors rather than seen as the passive recipients of care. This is all widely viewed as good social care practice at the individual level, but very few organisations think about applying it to how they are governed. Our Welsh care law actually puts a duty on local authorities to promote organisations in which the service users have voice and control, and specifically mentions co-ops as an ideal vehicle for this. So Cartrefi decided to take the plunge. We adopted a new constitution based on co-op principles with a democratic membership structure that gives the people we support both a voice and status as voting and contributing members. We went for the multi-stakeholder co-op model because we thought power sharing should include our workforce as well. And we established a third member category of community support members, which can include families and friends, but is open to anyone who supports what we do. We did something else as well, and that was to make community building, alongside providing social care, a core activity for all our members. We interpreted the co-op principle of member economic contribution so that it includes contributions of time and talent, particularly in support of community building activities. This created opportunities for the people we support and their support staff and local community members to get together and do things that help their community and others in need. One local forum raised funds for a women's refuge, another supported local people who were homeless. Some members formed a choir and started to visit a local care home to lead singing sessions, etc., etc. All of these activities reinforced the idea that everyone had something to contribute, and it strengthened connections and relationships with the local community. It's also been a lot of fun. However, sadly, nearly all of this collective and cooperative activity had to come to a sudden halt when the pandemic started. We've been able to use video calls like this one to touch base with elected member representatives, but local member forums and community-focused activities have had to stop. The priority has been staying home and staying safe. For a couple of weeks, we had the well-publicised problem of there being no protective equipment, but the Welsh Government, local authorities and our own self-help purchasing meant we quickly got on top of it, and that panic is over. Working out how to stay safe was an initial problem, with first of all a lack of guidance, and then so much guidance it was hard to keep up with. But that has settled down too. And of course in Wales, I can say smugly, we still have statutory guidance that is understandable and geared towards keeping us safe and saving the NHS. And there's been more cooperation between provider agencies and between providers and commissioners than has been the norm for many years. The pandemic has led to a welcome pause in competitive tendering, and that has created an environment for talking and sharing. It has also led to a surge of commissioner sympathy towards providers, backed up by funding support to help us all meet the extra costs of equipment and sickness absence. So it's turned into a strangely positive time. In terms of post-COVID recovery, I have a mixture of doubts and hopes. I think we are blessed in Wales to have people in high places who want cooperation and citizen empowerment to flourish. But to unpick the marketisation of public services like social care so that people cooperate rather than compete, and so that local authorities and their suppliers have long-term mutually supportive relationships, is a long-term project, and one which has not been helped by EU procurement regulations and is unlikely to get much support by the UK government for a good few years yet. If we can't get rid of the competitive care market, what I hope we can do in Wales, and maybe in some English regions and cities too, is to reshape it and redesign how value is measured and rewarded, so that more and more agencies develop or adapt themselves along community building, power sharing, cooperative lines. Leaving the EU just might help. Devolved governments just might have the freedom to remodel how they and local authorities commission services. With a bit of help, as Derek has been highlighting, from the co-op movement and others, the upsurge of community self-help activity that has occurred over the last 2 months just might turn into a sustained and citizen-led part of the social care system. That in turn might flatten the curve of projected care needs and contribute towards the affordability of decent wages for all care workers. We may eventually look back on the pandemic as the start of a process of welfare reform in which cooperation and care co-ops flourish. And I shall end on that hopeful note. Thank you.
Thank you, both Derek and Adrian. They were both very hopeful contributions, and I'm really thrilled that we're able to start thinking about what sort of the sunny uplands might look like if we can get this right as we design what happens next. So I've got a couple of hands up, and I've had a comment in. So Andrew Jenkins, I'm going to unmute you first to ask a question.
Hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both. Thank you all three very much for this. This has been really encouraging, actually. I'm sitting here, my parents are Welsh, my family is Welsh, but I live in England, and I'm just wondering how we could move to more towards getting some of the results that you've been getting. So it's a bit of a kind of good example for us. My question is, I've been involved in a number of countries working on Millennium Development Goals and now on Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm involved in the university in Cambridge in some of that stuff. And there's a really interesting, I think, institute for sustainability, which is focused on trying to encourage business to get more into SDGs. And I think cooperatives are particularly well placed. But I also think that possibly the Sustainable Development Goals give us a really positive framework, which our government in principle has signed up to pursue a lot of the things that we've been talking about. And my question is whether that would be a useful context to focus on a bit more, really, because I think it would lead us all in the right direction.
Great, thank you very much. I've had a comment in the chat from David Phillips. It wasn't a question, but David, I don't know if you wanted to be unmuted to tell us about the Anna Phillips Foundation. Oh, doesn't seem to be unmuting. I'll share the comment. Oh, you're there. Hello.
Hello. Hi. Can you?
There we go. Great.
You can hear me.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I founded the Anna Phillips Foundation, which is I mean, in terms of big structure, it's a charitable incorporated organisation, one of the new models, but very much in terms of not so much in ownership, but in purpose and intent. It's a social enterprise, and as I've said in the comment there, we're working with. It was only established last year, and it's established in memory of my late daughter Anna, who took her life in 2015. And the purpose of the foundation is the enterprise, social enterprise, is to help people who have trauma-related mental illness or mental health challenges through using green care, or what we call ecotherapy, because we have the woodlands on Anglesey, and we're working with the health board, Betsy Cadwallader, and Bangor University, the clinical psychology people there, and with Habal, mental health, serious mental health charity, and with Caniad, who work with people with substance use difficulties, challenges. And so, it's, and I was very interested to just put in the context of this discussion, the points made by Derek and Adrian. I think, the challenge we face is because of what's happening. We were facing this challenge anyway before COVID, but that's accelerated it. Is a whole change, profound change in the way our money system works in the world, and that filters down to the community level. It's absolutely critical, and and if you also bring in the environment into this, you've got the environment, you've got the economy, and you've got finance. Those, if it's a threefold thing, and we cannot. I agree absolutely. We can't go back to business as usual, because the burden of most of what we've achieved in terms of growth in the previous decades has been as a result of the burning fossil fuels. So we're going to have to get used to, as Daniel Susskind says in his document, A Future World Without Work. We're going to have to readjust, and it's very, it's a challenge on many levels, the economic level, psychological level, community level. So it's a massive subject, and Positive Money, again, their advocacy of looking at a new form of currency, which is essential because we can't keep borrowing from the future. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
A lot to unpack there. Thank you very much for sharing, David. And I think that's quite enough to do for the first round, Derek and Adrian. I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to respond with, and then as a heads up, David Smith, I've seen your hand up, and Tom Flanagan, I know you'd like to ask a question, so I'll pick you two next, but we'll do some answers first so we don't overload our speakers.
Just in response to Andrew's point, I think the reference I would make would be to legislation that we have in Wales called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which applies to public bodies, but very much adopts an approach that you look at a broad range of goals, economic, social, health, environmental, and so forth, when taking decisions and spending money. And it's legislation that is not just, it's statutory for certain bodies, public sector bodies, but is also getting taken much more widely. And so, for example, when we did our impact report, our annual report a few years ago, we looked at it in terms of how we were measuring it up against the well-being of future generation goals and the behaviours that they support. And there is nothing in that legislation that goes against anything that you would expect from cooperative values and principles. It's so aligned to the cooperative movement and the values and principles, even if they don't use the same language. And I think that would be the point I would make and suggest, Andrew, have a look at that, Andrew, because it does try to do and is doing what you are talking about in terms of the SDGs.
Great. Anything you wanted to add as well, Adrian?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing to say is that Wales has got great policies and laws. It's just fantastic. But where I think we could get better is in joining them all up. So, for example, the foundational economy initiative that Jenny was talking about is absolutely great. And the foundational economy clearly includes social care. But foundational economy is dealt with through its economy division, and social care is dealt with in the health and social care division. And I don't know whether it's just a matter of business being too busy or whatever, but I don't think there's enough dialogue going on between those departments. And I think the overarching Future Generations Act that we've got and the goals there, is that everybody's supposed to buy into them, but I'm not sure if enough work has been done to actually translate them into the most meaningful ways of measuring specific things. So I did a little bit of work looking at the Future Generations goals and the aspirations of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and there is alignment. But unless some detailed work is there, you end up with reports coming from statutory bodies which are blandly confirming they're on a nice journey towards achieving the Future Generations goals, that there's not actually a lot of detailed activity reflecting that on the ground. Most importantly, in terms of what commissioners value in the contracts that they let. So controversial, possibly.
Possibly, although I think your comment about some of the sort of great enabling laws that exist in Wales, but not necessarily seeing that yet translate into the burgeoning of the cooperative sector that we as cooperators all hope for, is something that's come up. We ran a round table in Newport not too long ago, looking at how we make good on Labour's manifesto promise around doubling the cooperative economy, and that was very much a theme that came through when we were talking about the Wales Commission, a cooperative commission done a few years ago, and all of the fantastic enabling work done through now the Senate as a result of that. And that nonetheless, given Wales has some of the best bits of legislation to support co-ops out there, there still needs to be, there's sort of still a bit of a missing step still to see some of that.
If I could quickly come back in
together. Yeah, please.
Just to say, none of our great laws trump the public contracts regulations.
No.
So my point about the EU and how that's held us back is significant.
Great, thank you. So I put David on notice as well as Tom. So I'll unmute you first, David.
Sorry, Jenny wants to say something.
I'll make sure that people who haven't spoken get a chance to ask their questions first, and if we've still got a bit of time left, I'll bring people back in. David, you're not muted anymore.
No, thank you, Anna.
Great.
What shone through vividly for me in terms of Adrian's contribution was the importance of economic democracy. It didn't sound like a political theory lesson, but it actually shone through. And I think that's a really powerful message that I don't hear often enough in Wales. I'm just wondering in that context then how Adrian responds to the view that with multiple fragmented private sector provider contracts, that the time has actually come for the main components of adult social care to be brought under state ownership and control.
Great.
It's an open goal, Adrian, go for it.
I'm going to let Tom Flanagan do. Jenny, I have spotted you. I've got a few questions lined up still. Tom, I've clicked unmute, but you might need to do something at your end. There we go.
Hi, Anna, thanks for that. Yeah, revenue is going to be tight going forward, but capital at the moment is fairly cheap and available. So I wondered whether there was an opportunity for the National Investment Bank. I know there's an opportunity up here in Scotland through the Scottish National Investment Bank to support the sector as it emerges from the crisis, and perhaps have a specific investment fund to support co-ops and mutuals.
Thank you very much. And Pat, you've had your hand up patiently. I'll unmute you now. Though you might need to do something at your end too. There we go. Great.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just like, I'm a completely new member, so
welcome.
bit of an interesting experience for my first one. All I'd say is, and I can't remember which one of you said it, but I heard a mention of a way of supporting ethical businesses and businesses that have a cooperative approach. And what would you think that would look like? Perhaps rather ironically, would it be a points-based system, or would it be, or would you suggest some other way of making that into a reality?
Great, thank you. So if you want to give those two a go, Adrian and Derek. Oh, Adrian, you're still muted. I think, there we go, perfect.
Okay, I mean, David's question about whether social care and various other things should get pulled back into the state is one that he chucked at me yesterday by email, and I've been reflecting on it. The interesting thing was I started making a list of the positive reasons for taking everything back in control, and it was a very long list. It definitely gives one pause for thought. However, I think there is the risk in a sort of a state monopoly system of continuing to marginalise citizens and communities, and that seems to me to be the most sensible way forward. We probably can't afford, even now, to just be running everything on a paid-for state system basis, and we have to explore models in which there is a much more, as Jenny said, social public partnership approach going on. And so that's my main thought on that, David. In terms of Pat's question, I think at the moment, whilst we are still, underneath the public contract regulations, it's really difficult for commissioners to be seen to be favouring a particular model unless they can nail, like a co-op. There's been lots of calls in Wales for more co-ops in social care. But it's actually really quite difficult for a local authority commissioner to simply start favouring co-ops in their contract letting arrangements. So I've been doing some work with a colleague of David's in the Welsh Co-op Centre with a view to a paper for the Welsh Government on this question. And I think that we need to develop cleverer ways of giving points to organisations who are doing lots of the right things. They're not just good at providing care. They are adding value in a whole range of ways, and that can be internal added value in terms of user and worker accountability, or outward looking in terms of their commitment to collaborate with other agencies, their connection and commitment to local areas. All of those things, it seems to me, need to start being scored, and then logically providers will start to try and behave in that way, or if they don't, others who do, like co-ops, will start to flourish.
Anything to add on that, Derek?
Yeah, I agree with Adrian insofar as how you do this. I don't agree with Adrian in terms of this hasn't been possible because of current legislation and European legislation, not because I'm a pro-European, although I am, because you do see this happen in practice. So it hasn't been the legislation that has stopped this, it's been the implementation. So we're involved in bidding for pieces of work and contracts, and sometimes we're asked to complete community benefit statements about the benefit that we're going to contribute to the local community when we're delivering a contract, but these pieces of information are not scored and they're not monitored. So Adrian's point is the right one. I think it's going to be very difficult to get to a point potentially where you can say, well, we're going to favour a certain business model, because co-ops are not just one legal entity, but you can already support and give more points to businesses that do certain things, which as a result are going to benefit co-ops and social enterprises because of how they operate, because they think about the triple bottom line, or even more than that when they're doing things. And if those things are scored, then they're going to do better by default, and it would encourage others to be more like co-ops in how they undertake their work. But I think that's the problem, has been that we haven't pushed that now, and we've hidden behind legislation, and we can be getting on with that stuff. Just in terms of Tom's point, just very briefly, I think that is a good point. I think that is something for us to consider. We have a development bank in Wales, and they don't have dedicated funds at the moment for the co-op and social enterprise sector. As you say, capital is cheap, and there is an opportunity for us to think about dedicated funding for the sector beyond what already exists. There is some dedicated funding not delivered by the development bank at the moment. As an aside, we are involved in developing a community bank called Bank Cambria, which is a retail SME banking model. A number of these initiatives are taking place across the UK, but one of the most advanced is the one in Wales to enable people to access banking in their area, small businesses too. And I'm on the board of that, and I think that's moving forward, and I think that could make a big difference. Adrian's been involved in that too.
Fabulous. And I've kept you all for coming on to an hour, so I'm super grateful for your time. It's been a really interesting discussion, and I think what I've taken from this is that we need to be hearing a lot more from Wales and on the work that Welsh cooperatives and Senedd members are doing. So my colleague Karen and I will have a think about how we can make sure that we keep the rest of the UK topped up with good Welsh content and examples. For my part, I'm going to make sure that you've all got links to both Cartrefi Cymru and the Welsh Co-op Centre, as well as a bit of information about sort of social business funds and others that the Welsh Government's doing. And I'll pull out some of those examples that Derek mentioned as well. And you mentioned a Bevan Foundation report that sounds like we all need to give it a read. So I will dig that out and make sure you've all got it in your inboxes too. I know that there are quite a few of you who have commented and had hands up that we haven't had time to get to. You can always email me on policy@party.coop. And I will happily pass it on to anyone who needs, respond, or perhaps you'd like to write us a blog post or get involved in a future Zoom. But with that, thank you very much for joining. Please stay safe and look after yourself, enjoy the weather, but make sure to be careful in the way that you do so, and stay at home if you can. Thank you so much, and bye, see you next week.